Hello. We're here for another great training webinar from FormAssembly. Welcome to how FormAssembly uses FormAssembly. Real use cases, real results. I probably say this too much, but I'm really excited to talk about this one. We do a lot of in-depth training, both in our webinars and in talking to individual customers all the time. But every now and then we get to bring up a topic like this. And honestly, have a little more fun with it. Really interesting title here, but we also think you're going to see some use cases, some demos that maybe you haven't seen in your day-to-day or some of the training documentation that you've had as part of your FormAssembly experience before. So really awesome topic. Can't wait to get into it. Have to do a little bit of housekeeping first, y'all. I'm Skylar. I'm on the product marketing team here at FormAssembly. So love to get to talk to it, with individual customers, going out to events, hearing from people at webinars like this. But today, as we get into it, maybe it's your first one of these, maybe it's been a bit since you sat with us for one of these, but take a look around the screen. We're using On24 for our webinar platform, and that means you've got a lot of options kind of around the picture there. You can sort of move and resize things as you'd like. If you want to, look at the discussion more or kind of zoom in more on some of the demos and things that are going to be on screen today. There's also a Q&A section on your screen there. We'd love you to pay some attention to that. If anything comes up while we're talking that you'd love more details on or inspire some ideas from you to ask about, please just enter your questions there in the Q&A. Those will enter a queue that the speakers and demonstrators today will be able to see. And, of course, speaking of questions, one of the ones we always get is, will this be recorded? Will I have a chance to maybe revisit some of the demonstrations or steps that we're going to see on screen? And absolutely, we're recording this. We'll send it back out to view afterwards. Only other thing to talk about is early shout out for a little resources section that's also on the screen there. That's got some additional links that are great sort of jump off points from some of the things we're going to talk about and show as part of our demonstrations today. So keep those in mind now, and you'll probably hear them talked about a little later. So again, a little bit of housekeeping, a little bit of prep before we get into it. Excited to have you here for the next few minutes. But I've got a lot of help today. A couple of my heroes here at FormAssembly, I get to talk to people, craft various kinds of messaging, help clarify how we describe and talk about things at FormAssembly. But these two really get in there with our knowledge, direct training, really helping affect some of these real world outcomes and showing not how FormAssembly uses FormAssembly, though that's what we'll talk about today, but how others get to use FormAssembly, right? So I'm just the hype man. I'll let them talk about themselves, introduce themselves. Joelle, Kayla, how's it going?
Hey, Skylar. Thank you. Yeah, it's going good. Excited to talk about today. So I'm Joelle Swanson. I'm the product trainer. You've probably seen me around if you've attended some of these training webinars, but I really do love to get in here and show you what all and how you can use FormAssembly. And I'm really excited to show you how we actually use it in our day-to-day jobs today. And I'm joined by Kayla, my manager, who's going to talk about some more of our forms too.
Yes, so good to see you guys. I've been at FormAssembly for 8 years now, so I've definitely seen how we use a lot of our own forms. So this is a topic I was pretty excited about.
Yeah. So we can kind of get into what we're going to talk about today. So we'll first start off with a CSAT form that we use for our product training for our internal employees. And then we'll look at some self-grading forms and those knowledge checks that we use. And after that, we'll wrap up with Kayla walking us through our customer feedback form that she built out before we end with some final thoughts and, of course, questions. And for us, really, forms aren't just necessarily a way to collect information. They're really part of our processes. And for each form, as we go through and build them, we really try to stop and consider what it is we're trying to accomplish. And we hope that you guys can see that with each of our forms that we're talking about today. So let's talk into and dive into our first form, these CSAT forms. So for these, this is going to be the form that I send off for any of those one-off live trainings where I don't necessarily need to build out a full training with our internal LMS system. And I do still want to gather that data from those live one-off trainings. So for those, I can just use this CSAT. And this is just a way that I can quickly gather that feedback and metrics in a flexible and standardized way. Give me just a second to share my screen, and then we can look into this a little bit more. There we go. Okay, so for this form, this is just a form that I will send out and then can use in our processes later to send all of this data to a Google Sheet and record that metrics and share with managers and reference as needed. And this works perfect for us. So for this, I send this out after a training to any of our team members, and I go ahead and pre-fill in this training event name. That way, whoever is filling it out, they don't have to worry about that. And I can also keep track of which events are for what metrics and which employees have attended which training events and things like that. Then moving down, I got where they can enter their name and their team, but also I have an overall training experience rating. And on my form itself, these are just some radio buttons, but I've added some custom code to transform them into stars, you know, have a little fun, make the form a little bit more engaging. Now, as part of this though, I do want to keep track of, say someone rates a training 3 stars or less. I want to be able to collect feedback on why, you know, they might have rated that training a little bit less. So I've added a conditional optional field to show when someone has said, this training was only just a 3 stars or less. Then I have a variety of fields and a matrix. And here in this matrix, they can go through and say, okay, great. I strongly agree with that, agree, neutral, disagree, kind of just go through and rate all of these. And these will actually be used later in this form to calculate in calculations to calculate the metrics and things. But before getting into those hidden calculations, though, I do kind of want to talk about these 2 optional fields. You know, I want to have them available to my respondents so I can collect that extra information if they feel the need to do that. But I've also gone ahead and purposely labeled them as optional so they know they don't have to fill it out, but it's good for me to have if they do feel like filling it out. Then the final bit on my form is going to be these calculated fields, which add up all of those matrix questions and then generate a percentage for the CSAT. Let's take a look at the form builder to see how I've done these calculations. So here you can kind of see that rating there is just a radio button, as I mentioned. But then we get into the matrix. So the first part of calculating those CSAT metrics is going to go in to each of these matrix questions. Getting tongue-tied between metrics and matrix. Sorry about that. But so each of these matrix questions I've created as a variable. And I've assigned a variable name for 1 through, and for each of the values for the questions, I've gone through and done 1 through 5, depending on if they strongly disagree or strongly agree. Then I've taken each of those variables and coming down here to the calculations, I have 2 fields for each of those. So the first field is the rating, and this is just going to be a calculation that adds each of the matrix questions for that specific metrics. And so then once they are added together, I then assign a variable name to this. For this one is going to be a rating 2 that I can then take into the actual CSAT rating. And here in the CSAT, all I'm doing is just having a calculation to say, hey, put in this number of all of those questions added up, divided by the total number of points that can be applied to the section, which in this case is 20. times 100 to get the percentage. And then the last little thing that I've added to this calculation that, I really like to have like the nice numbers is this 2 fixed 2. And this allows me to set the number of decimal points I want to appear in my percentage. And that's going to be set to 2 specifically. And if I want to increase or decrease this decimal point, I can go ahead and change this to any number I want. Say I don't want any decimal points. I could change that to 0 and I would have just a nice rounded percentage. Then the final part of our CSAT process is going to be sending these responses to a Google Sheet. Now for me, I prefer to use the Google Sheet and our workflow connector. And with this, I can come in here and customize the data that is getting sent to Google. And with this, I've got it set up so this first action is going to be sending to a tab in my Google Sheet where managers have access to, and they can come in and see which employees have attended which sessions and filter in things. And here I can just be like, okay, great. Let me just put in the specific information the managers need. I don't need to send everything, just a few specific fields from that form, and they're good to go. Then I can go ahead and add another action to my Google Sheets workflow connector to send to a new tab, still within that same spreadsheet, and send all of the fields that I need to that tab, and really be able to customize all of that data that is being sent to Google before it gets sent over. So then that way, when I go in and perform any metrics or reference it later, each tab is custom to that exact need. And with all of this, this product training survey form and workflow allow me to quickly collect any and all feedback for those one-off live trainings that I do, while at the same time ensuring that all of the data I need to record and reference is sent where it needs to go. Now, we can talk about the next form, and that is going to be our self-grading.
I was gonna interrupt because I'm just so struck. Like, of course, when I saw you bring this example out, it was one of those like slap my forehead moments, right? And maybe for other people in the audience as well, right? CSAT's one of those things that we all sort of, come in contact with, whether we administer themselves or, people are foisting them on us. But this is one of those things, right? It's like sometimes in the past, we've maybe had to pay a separate service to collect this kind of CSAT feedback, or I've seen it, it's attached. A CSAT form is something that's attached to that random piece of HR software at our companies, and it kind of becomes shelfware because we don't really know how to, configure it or sort of make it our own. So I was like, of course we would just, build this ourselves internally. So I love that I saw your team not only using a CSAT in general, but like seeing you tailor it specifically to like training feedback, right? Like it's something that looks so simple on the surface, but I see it looks like you kind of tailored it to y'all's specific needs, whether it's, kind of creating those radial responses, make it a little bit better experience, having those open-ended kind of questions, or sort of like what we just saw under the surface, right? Like attaching some of that variable logic. Of course, I'd want some of this information to automatically get stored in a Google Sheet. Again, just really struck by that, but it feels like one of these things that's maybe evolved over time with your team, like based on what sorts of stuff you wanted to collect with CSAT. I assume that's the case, but correct me if I'm wrong. I just shout out to thinking of and using this use case with your team, if nothing else.
Yes, Skylar. This is definitely something that has evolved. Just to kind of give you guys a little bit more context, this is something that has evolved as a result of we need some of these one-off live trainings where we do need to record the metrics and things. But as Skylar said, like this is something that we built custom because we don't need it to feed into our larger customer Salesforce reports or our customer LMS reports. And so with those ones are going to be taken care of, and we're going to filter those data in. This is going to be really just kind of like our smaller inter-management, inter-team kind of processes that we've built out to be able to have that recordable, but not have to go ahead and filter it into. And this is perfect if you have like that small team where it's like, great, I need to record things still, but I don't want to buy that extra product or integration or something. Let me just use FormAssembly and Google Sheets, and you can accomplish it.
Yeah, I love that. Maybe get some feedback about my specific role or my specific sort of division within a larger team. Uh, you know, super cool. Maybe other people listening today are sort of could use that sort of similar feedback. Anyway, sorry to interrupt. Thanks again. Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay, so then we can kind of go into the next form, and that's going to be those self-grading forms and knowledge checks. And so with these ones, Kayla and I, we are a tiny team of 2 that host the trainings. And so while we do have a customer-facing LMS with the Academy, where we can host any trainings, courses, things like that, there are a lot of times where we just want a little, like pop quiz after a meeting saying, hey, were you paying attention during that training? Or, just a knowledge check thrown into Slack so that people can take it at their own pace in their spare time. And we definitely do not have the time to manually grade all of those. And so that's kind of where these self-grading forms and knowledge checks come into play, where people can take them and immediately see what they got right or wrong and what they need to review. And here, if my pen will click, this is just one of the examples of a knowledge check that we have and use. And if you'd like to take a closer look at this exact form, as I'm going through it, you can actually check the link in the resource section. I've got this link. You can go through, click on it, and submit it and see everything as it's going through, if that is something that you guys would like to follow along with. So to start off all of my knowledge checks, I do usually like to have a just kind of text section explaining things, kind of making sure people are all on the same page before we dive into the questions. And for each of the questions, I prefer to stick to radio buttons and checkboxes. This just allows all of the choices to be seen at one time, but any of our multiple choice field types will work. So that's just something to keep in mind if that is something that you're interested in building out yourself. Then for the actual questions themselves, I've gone ahead and made them variables. So we saw a little bit about the calculations in the last form. We're going to use them again here. And so for this, I've gone ahead and assigned each of the questions a variable name. And then for each of the choices, I assign a value. So I either do a 0 for any incorrect choices, and the right choice, I assign a value of 1. Now, occasionally, I like to be able to allow partial credit for those select all that apply questions. And when I like to do this, what I do is assign like a shortened variable name. Like for this one, I did shortened version of 3, and I allow for the question to have the choices be 1 value evenly divided between all of these correct choices. Now, however, if I don't want to allow for a partial credit, I can add in a calculated field under that field to see if all of the correct choices were selected or not. And so what I do for this calculated field is just say, hey, if 3, this field right here, equals 1, then this is a 1 value, else 0. And then I also make this a variable of 3. And all of these questions then get added together here in the bottom in this total right calculated field, where I'm just adding all of those variables together. And with that, I make this a variable as well and have another percentage calculation to calculate how many people got right or wrong. Now, this isn't the end of the self-grading forms. The end of the self-grading form is actually going to be the thank you page, which you can do this as a form or a workflow. It's a little bit easier to see the thank you page in the workflow, so I've just imported it here into a workflow. But for this one, I have great job, you did great, on that quiz or self-grade, knowledge check or whatever, and I import the score that we just saw from that final percentage point. And then with each of these, I have, great, here's that question, your answer, use that field alias for the question, enter in the correct answer there, and then have a formula here that says, hey, if this choice, the correct choice for this answer, then send the value you are correct. And if it's not the correct choice, send a not quite there. And I've just gone through and did that for all of these questions. Now, how does this look when you've submitted the form? That's a great question. Here it is. I've gone ahead and already submitted a form so we can kind of see that final product of, great, my final score was an 86. And for the questions that I got right, I see a you are correct. And for the answers that I didn't get quite right, I have a not quite right, not quite there answer, and allow that to be able to see for each of those. And I can go through and add more formatting to this. Some of the knowledge checks that we've done in the past, I've even included a link to our documentation. If someone was a not quite there, I would include a link to our documentation. Then that way they can go through and look further into all of that and really have this thank you page customized to meet what we need for each of these people. And I can then, in the future, if like say a manager wants to keep track of it, I can add this to like a Google Sheet or email notifications, all of that, and just build on this knowledge check and self-grading quiz. And I have done that several times in the past. And these self-grading forms really allow us to quickly get them out to our team members, and especially with our team of two, you know, getting that responses back and not having to take that time to grade and provide individual feedback to everyone. We're able to just do it all right here. And with that, I was
just going to say this, you know, I got to see this example before we went live. This one really had my wheels turning, right? You know, we've all been at those companies where you kind of have like forced compliance or something. We watched the little video and then you have to answer the like 10 question knowledge quiz of like, did we understand the material about, you know, email etiquette, email security, stuff like that. But, you know, what if we could take that idea and, you know, make it a lot more, I mean, not that that stuff isn't useful, but a lot more sort of specialized to our teams' needs. Or I was really thinking of, you know, how many times are we in situations where there's a big rollout at your company or a big project that requires a lot of people to be sort of on the same page, and you're sort of, you know, we're doing the presentations and delivering the knowledge, but we're not sure if it's sinking in or not, right? Like as a follow-on step, having something like this, a template like this on hand felt great. And I think about a lot of our customers who are trying to sort of, you know, educate or bring up to speed a lot of, you know, say nonprofit volunteers and stuff like that, right? Like you're talking to them, you're kind of giving them, you know, making sure they understand sort of the talking points and the mission when they're talking to others out there. Like, what if you were able to spin up something like this to check against that knowledge, and then if I don't understand something, get that immediate feedback about kind of what I got wrong. So I don't know, just endless practical uses for again, like specialized kind of knowledge checks, training checks internally in again, what's a pretty simple to spin up sort of example in the tool. So another golf clap. I love this example. Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you, Skylar, for that additional ways to use these types of forms. They really are quite versatile in how you use them and when you can use them and for what you can use them. And I really just like to be able to provide that immediate feedback. And as kind of the key thing of what brought them about was being able to provide that feedback without being like, okay, great, now I have to go through like 150 responses and grade all of this and send an email and feedback back to each person.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then our final use case we want to share with you is going to be our customer feedback form that Kayla created for all of our teams to be able to submit feedback on behalf of customers. So I'll hand it off to you, Kayla.
Awesome. Hello, everybody. Yeah, so the CS feedback form, as I call it, but it's really more of an internal feedback form. This was built out of a super specific need, which is we would have our CSMs, our support team members, sales team members, others speaking with you, our customers, and valuable feedback would just like come up naturally during that conversation. So, like during a support case or an email thread or a call or just a throwaway comment made, um, contained really valuable feedback. And so, while our customers can submit feedback directly through the website, you've probably heard us, mention that before, but sometimes that's not the exact experience that we want. Sometimes we want to capture that feedback on the customer's behalf while we're having the conversation. So that was the need at the time when I was asked to make this feedback form. So the form that you're about to see here it's a simplified version. The actual form has, production values and internal information, but don't worry, like this demo is like super close to the actual process. So the process begins for us, at least inside Salesforce. So on our account, contact, and case records, we have a custom button called feedback. You can see it right there. And if you see me looking down, it's because I'm actually looking at the screen while Joelle is my hands. So we're doing fun puppeteer moments here. So what you're seeing here with this feedback button is actually one of my favorite use cases. We have an entire help doc on this, by the way. But clicking that button opens up the feedback form in a new tab and automatically passes information from the Salesforce record into the form. So in this case, what it's specifically bringing over is case ID. So this is using Salesforce merge fields, which is like a really useful concept. I talk about this one all the time because it's allowing you to launch a form directly from Salesforce and pre-fill it with that contextual information from the record where they click the button. We could do an entire webinar on that alone. So if you're interested, let us know. That's a whole webinar. So today, all you need to know is that I use merge fields in there to pull the information from the record and pull it into a pre-filled link. So Joelle, if you want to go into the pre-fill connector. Perfect. This is where this is becoming useful, right? Because the button is opening up the form and it's passing through the case ID into the form as a parameter. And then here in the pre-fill connector, you can see that case ID is being used to locate the correct case record in Salesforce. And once it's finding that case, it can pull in the additional information connected to it, like the case ID, the account ID, the contact ID, those types of things. And one thing I really like about this setup is the button only needs to pass the case ID. And from there, the pre-fill connector can retrieve the rest of the information automatically. Very, very handy there, especially for things like character limits. But I digress. So for today's demo, what we're about to show you, we've made the fields visible. So Joelle, if you want to open up the form builder, that case ID, account ID, and contact ID are being pulled into here. These are visible fields right now, but you can hide these fields. Which is also very, very handy. But in addition to those fields that we're using to like support the process, we also are pulling in this thing here that we're calling the requester ID. That's actually the user ID of whoever clicked the button. That's another really handy Salesforce merge field if you've never used it, where you can do it where it pulls in like the person who took the action and clicked the button. It'll pull in their user ID. So I saw that somebody asked about anonymization. We will talk more about that in the Q&A session. But I did want to bring up something about that right here, actually. So the requester ID being that user ID is really handy because first and foremost, it means that the employee does not have to type in their first and last name on the form. We already know who initiated this, right? Second off, this is keeping the process really fast, really clean. And third, this is giving us a slightly more like controlled way to handle the data because since we're using the user ID rather than their names, we can still identify who submitted the feedback if needed, but the data itself is also a little more controlled and easier to manage. So I'd call this like partially anonymized what we do here, because in terms of reporting, we do want to know who submitted the feedback, but at the same time, it's not obvious. As long as people don't know who that ID is associated with, you can actually run reporting on it and say, like, this ID has filled out this much feedback without outright stating the name. So partially anonymous. There's other methods to make this fully anonymous, but that's what we're doing for this one. If you have any questions, feel free to ask about that anytime. But once the values are pulled into the form, as you saw here, we're going to move to the feedback collection section called Submit Feedback. It's right there. Perfect. So this section is starting off with a dynamic pick list. If you've never used a dynamic pick list before, the short explanation is that it uses Salesforce data and it builds options inside the pick list every time the form opens. So you get a new fresh pick list every single time the form opens using that Salesforce data. And so I'm leaning forward to making sure I can see it all too. So I made this dynamic pick list out of our feedback topics. The reason I chose feedback topics is because software changes so fast. FormAssembly is growing, changing, moving, running at the speed of light. And so while these features are evolving and the new functionalities are coming out, the list of things that you may want to submit feedback on is also changing constantly. So if we hard-coded feedback topics into the form, we'd have to keep updating it every single time the product updated, which would be really, really hard. So instead, what this dynamic pick list is doing is it's looking at the feedback topic records, a custom object that I created in Salesforce, and it's using those records to generate the pick list automatically. So if we create a new feedback topic record in Salesforce, like for a new connector or a new feature, it will automatically appear in every form using this dynamic pick list setup without us needing to update the forms themselves. It can also pull in additional values from the selected record. So what we've got here is we've got the name of the feedback topic. That's what's going to show up in the pick list. We've also got the category and the record ID. And you'll notice that there's some conditions under this as well. And one of those conditions is that the topic status must equal active. That was also a really deliberate choice. So in Salesforce, if you delete your records, it can create these historical reporting issues because you're removing data and it might actually be connected to older submissions or trends. So instead of deleting outdated topics, I have a status field on there with active and deactivated. So if you switch a topic to deactivated, the topic is still there in Salesforce for reporting, but it will no longer show up in this pick list to be chosen from. So that's another fun little pro tip from Kayla. So this is one of those situations where I'm obviously not just trying to think of what we're doing with the form right now, but just long-term reporting, long-term data health. So speaking of long-term data health, let's talk for a second about that category. Joel, if you want to click next. There it is. Perfect. So this way you can see the categories while I talk about these. So the feedback topics themselves are actually intentionally granular. We might have separate topics for things like conditional rules or multiple choice fields or text area fields, because you may have feedback on those individual field types. But those are the different topics, but they all fall under this broader category of form builder. So that's what the category field is for. You can see a few of them here, portal connectors, form builder, things like that. So with these categories, you get two levels of reporting, right? You can look at the super specific feedback topics, or you can zoom out and look at broader trends by category. So right now, category on those, hello, this is Kayla talking about Salesforce a lot too. I'm sorry. On those feedback topics, I have the category as a text field, actually. And I do that, and I have a spreadsheet, and it's mapping each feedback topic to the broader category so I can track it in there, which is a little bit manual. But the reason I do it this way is because categories are generally more stable than features. They don't change very often. So I'd much rather deal with a spreadsheet that I need to update occasionally, and text fields that I update occasionally. But when I need to update it, I'm just updating the text values on the records, because as long as the text is identical, Salesforce can report on them together, which I really prefer. Because if I have to do heavy pick list management over in Salesforce, removing pick list values can create these like reporting complications. If you've worked with Salesforce reporting, you've probably experienced like at least one pick list related headache like at some point. So I think you know what I mean. If you don't know what I mean, removing a pick list choice can cause just like a whole waterfall of problems in reporting. So that's why I'm using text fields there. But that's where these dynamic pick lists are so helpful, because when you're selecting your topic, it's pulling in that category. It's not allowing the respondent, aka our like salesperson, to change that field. Instead, it's assigning it, and it's making it like this is the category for it, so they can't change anything. I can. Keeps the data nice and clean, makes it so that I don't have reporting issues later. And it's just a really nice like controlled slide into data management. So it's a little more manual on my end, but it's a lot cleaner and a lot more flexible. So that's my preference. Now, if you want to click, oh, right, I'll just mention this quick. You can also see that the ID is there. So this is where you can map those category and IDs to the fields in the form. So Joel, if you want to click OK, we can show that then. Here we go. Perfect. So you can see that this is where it'll pull it in. So when they select a topic, it'll pull in the ID and the category for them, and you can make these no overwrite fields, which is great. Then underneath this, we also have a radio button here that says, were you able to locate a relevant topic? It defaults to yes, because in most situations they should be able to find it. But if somebody really cannot find like a relevant topic, they can change this to no, and that'll make this section appear conditionally, right? So this is going to allow us to like capture gaps in the topic structure without forcing people to choose an inaccurate option just to like finish the form. What'll happen is if they click no, they can suggest the name of the topic and say what category they think it should be in. But this is a bit manual for now, but that's because I actually built this form before workflow was really fully baked. So I'm working right now on moving this to workflow, because in workflow we have like approval processes and conditional pathing, and we can, only send the data to Salesforce after it goes through an approval. So I'm going to be using those super, super powerful features over in workflow to take care of this portion of it. I'm building that out right now. Again, happy to show this again when that's done. That would be kind of fun. But in the meantime, I wanted to show you what we currently are using, but that's the plan. So that's an option that they get to use. And then if you want to keep going down, Joelle, as I zoom my face in a little bit there. Okay, I see you now. Right. So once the topic is selected, we're moving into the actual feedback here. We have two required fields, a short description and a full description. The short description is like a quick summary. It's like, I'd like the form builder to support dark mode. That's feedback we received. And then the full description gives the context, which is like why the customer brought it up and what workflow they're trying to accomplish and pain points and additional details. That kind of stuff goes into the big one. So that way, when I'm in Salesforce and I'm running my reports at a high level, I can at the highest level, I can identify trends by the category or the topic. And then you can dig in and look at the short descriptions underneath said category or topic, be like, oh, that's roughly what's going on. And then if we really want to know, then we can get like a big report exported of those short descriptions, and then have the long descriptions next one where we can really dig into it. So it's just really allowing me to report at every level with just this one form and just these couple of fields, and and not only that, but then we end this with another one of my absolutely favorite things that I've ever made. So this is, do you need to submit additional feedback? A very basic looking radio button. It defaults to no. They can click yes. And it looks so simple, right? Well, it does something really cool, actually. Joelle, if you want to navigate over to the notifications page of this form, if you go down here to the redirect, there's a formula there. And what that's doing is it's reopening a fresh version of the form while carrying over the case ID and the requester ID. And so then the case ID goes through the prefill connector and it pulls in the account and the contact and everything. And the requester ID goes back in there and it's a fresh form and someone can submit a new piece of feedback without needing to re-enter any of the context. And people often ask me when they see this, why didn't you use repeatable sections, Kayla? There's two reasons. The first one is kind of technical. Dynamic pick lists and repeatable sections, not the most ideal combination for a variety of things like API calls and tech, doesn't matter. That's one thing. But the second one, this is the bigger one, data quality. So I found that when people used repeatable sections for feedback collection, they tended to add like way too many entries. They would duplicate information across sections, and sometimes they would like split really valuable context like across smaller entries. And sometimes they'd like leave the form open during the calls and like time the whole thing out. Or they'd add like 12 for one call. And it just wouldn't make a lot of sense, you know? So I found that the quality was a lot higher when you would have each submission focused on one piece of feedback at a time. And that's, you know, we don't charge per response. So this is a very reasonable approach for this use case. But that's the thing. You don't always have to have everything crammed into like one form in the truest sense of like all these repeatables and conditionals and this and that. Sometimes you can do something like having the form reset itself and it's so much cleaner and it's so much easier to look back on and report on. And if someone runs into an issue, to reprocess it. And I just find it so much better for this specific use case to do it this way. And I think that's one of the benefits of form assemblies. You don't have to do it one way. You can do it whatever way suits the scenario. You know what I mean? So finally, we're just going to take a quick look at the submit connector real quick. There it is. Awesome. So as a certified
prefill, it's loading.
Yeah, perfect. So as it's loading, so I'm a certified Salesforce administrator, and I gotta admit, I love a junction object like a lot. And so that's essentially what we're working with here, right? So the feedback record itself is so there's like a feedback record, and that is different from the feedback topic. And this is essentially a junction object because it's connecting the actual feedback submission, like the meat of it, to multiple related Salesforce records. So you can see here that this creates the feedback record, and that has lookup relationships to the contact, the account, the case, the user ID. It also has one for the topic. What you can see there is it's actually, I've also got like an unassigned topic as a catch-all, so that if somebody for some reason manages to get through without it, it'll just do the unassigned topic, which is totally fine. And then the feedback record is not only doing this, but it's also, and then it's, you know, we've got the category and stuff. But the important thing here is that we're getting all of these things from simple parts of our form and just sending them through. And it's creating this beautiful junction object that's spreading out into all these different areas, right? And it's not a master detail relationship either between the topic and the feedback. It's a lookup relationship, which means if a topic is removed, we don't lose the feedback records, which is a really, really flexible structure there, because that feedback can come from cases, accounts, contacts, other sources entirely. It could be on this topic, but we may need to move it to that topic. So that's why I chose those lookup relationships rather than master detail ones. It's a little safer from like a data integrity perspective. But that's another beautiful thing that form assembly can handle here, using all of those IDs. So I will stop rambling about Salesforce, I promise. Overall, the goal of this form was just to like create this really scalable way of capturing the feedback directly and then structuring it cleanly for reporting and stuff and making it flexible enough to evolve with the product and then put it where we can report on it. And that's the gist of this. So I know that Joelle has some other really cool examples of things that you can do with our forms and everything to share. So I'll go ahead and turn it back over to her.
Thank you, Kayla. Thank you for that. I always love to see how the feedback form was built and the thought process behind that. Before we get into a couple of the additional ways that form assembly across teams use it, we've just got a quick poll of which form assembly use case inspired you the most. Skylar, which one are you thinking?
Yeah, I love questions like this when we do these sorts of webinars. It's a great chance to just reflect for a minute, right? Like when I talk to our customers, it's always the case that their teams bought FormAssembly because they had some like real mission critical, donation form they had to set up, or super secure, city utility set of forms that they needed to get stood up. And yeah, you did it, you bought the thing, you got it set up, the fire's out. But a lot of times we don't take that step back and realize all of these different features and use cases are kind of at our fingertips, right? So maybe you saw some useful ones today, or maybe you saw a few features within these that kind of get the wheels turning, right? Of, hey, anywhere where we're interested in data and there's a process around it, that's, something we could probably be using FormAssembly features for. So if you're an existing customer, I mean, this stuff, a lot of it's again, already at your fingertips. Hopefully caught a little inspiration today, but yeah, super curious to see what people are chiming in with.
Yes, I'm curious too. Let's go ahead and move on. But if you're inspired and want to say or something or ask more questions, definitely get those in there. And the customer feedback one, yes, that one is definitely probably our most complex use case. The other ones are very specific of how and when you'd use them. So I love to see that, like Salesforce, so many of our customers use Salesforce, and we've really tried to make it work for all of our processes with that feedback form. Kayla did an awesome job with it. So let's talk about some of the other ways FormAssembly teams, and I'm going to talk a little bit faster because I see we're getting short on time and I want to leave plenty of time for questions. And some of the other ways our teams use FormAssembly forms is going to be our support team. If you submitted a support case, you've used a FormAssembly form. Our submit a support case is a form that links up from our website. You enter in all the details to create that case. Then we also use for our support team a case escalation form. And if a case needs to be escalated, our support team can use that form to provide all of the escalation details about that case so it can move up the process smoother. And then the final form is our wellness committee. They use a lot of forms to check in with us and, provide some fun for everyone. And if you attended the FormFest webinar hosted by Lindsay Webster, you might have seen the Mad Lib workflow she created for the wellness committee and just how much fun it is to see what you can do with it. And most teams at FormAssembly use our forms and workflows in various ways to accomplish their goals and record the data they need. So really showing that flexibility of our product. Now to wrap up, I want to leave you guys with just a few final thoughts. And the first is just to keep your forms focused. Ask only for what you need and try to avoid any unnecessary required fields. And if a field is optional, let your respondents know that. Then you want to also try to make your forms feel personalized, using that conditional content or pre-filling their name or pre-filling information for them so they don't have to enter in details over and over again. And lastly, don't be afraid to make your forms dynamic. Use those calculations, use the dynamic pick list, use formulas. They can really elevate the respondent experience while also saving you time behind the scenes, as we've seen throughout all of the forms. And I hope these gave you guys just a few ideas and inspiration. And with the last few minutes, let's get some questions.
I got you here. I've been reading. Okay. So for one moment, Amanda's question, I think, is a great thing that we should discuss for a second. So Amanda was asking, are the responses anonymous? Are you able to see who submitted the quiz and their score? They have some areas where they specifically need to see who scored what. So here's the thing. The answer is absolutely. And in fact, it's sort of the opposite. As long as the data is being collected of their name, that will be visible inside the form. But Joelle, do you want to talk a little bit about how it becomes anonymous when it hits the Google Doc specifically, Google Sheet?
Yes. Yeah. So you can collect whatever information you want in the forms. And what it does is you can do that, and then you can have it be anonymous on the thank you page. And then in the Google Sheet, you can have like specific tabs where it's like, okay, great, I need to have this person's name, but I also need another tab where their name is not. And using that Google workflow connector that I kind of showed with the first form, you can customize what fields get sent over from your form. And with Google, one thing that I really love that I didn't mention is you're able to lock tabs. So like if you need to be able to show managers who has completed the quiz and their grades, you can have that tab locked to just managers, while everyone else can see like the answers to the quiz or something and be able to use that.
Perfect. So I'm just going to mention this one really quick. Sarah was asking if we'll review workflow or if it's a different training. I am writing, I've written it down that we want to do a nice workflow basics webinar. So don't worry, I've added it to the list. I'm the boss, I'm allowed to do that. We also have a lot of people saying they do want to learn more about the pre-filling and dedicated webinars for that button and everything. So that's all been written down as well. Don't worry, we've got all of those notes. We have a question here about dynamic pick lists from Gary asking, do they require you to have a certain FormAssembly plan?
Yes, they do. You need to have the Salesforce add-on first off. If you don't have that, you're not going to have access to the Salesforce dynamic pick lists at all. And then if you have the, I'm trying to remember, the essentials. My brain was trying to come up with like Premier. It's just the old one. And I'm like, that's not it. It's essentials now. So you need essentials and the Salesforce add-on.
Perfect. Now, Anne's asked a good question here because obviously we have templates, but is asking about whether there's form templates for workflows yet. I'm going to just let you in on a teeny secret, which is we are aware of this request. We also, by the way, have the same request, like we ourselves, as in Kayla and Joelle, have been asking for this too. And it has been heard and acknowledged. So while I can't say anything about timing or what is going to, can't tell you anything on that, but it's been heard and acknowledged.
We've been loud enough because
we've been very loud. So, you know, the feedback form, it legitimately, that's where it's all coming from too. It's actually going into that feedback form. Fun fact. So for dynamic pick lists, are there any limits on the number of pick list entries other than like standard limits?
So the standard limit is kind of just like that Salesforce, like 2000. What it does though is the Salesforce dynamic pick list will only return 100 at a time, but it'll still search Salesforce. So like say I have something that starts with a G and it's like 300 on the list. What I can just do is start typing like GA, the rest of the thing, and the dynamic pick list will bring up those Salesforce records that match that GA. And then as I go through, finish typing out, great, here in that 100 returned, there is my pick list option that starts with a GA.
Yep. And if anybody has trouble picturing this, that is totally fine. You can reach out to our support team anytime and they can walk you through it in a more like visual manner. But yeah, it's what Joelle said is spot on there. So Anne would like to know more about moving something from Form Native to workflow. And I'm just going to say, Skylar, is that video on the website from the webinar where we did that recently, right? Joelle, I feel like we showed that.
You'll find some enter that if you can do a straight up search FormAssembly webinars or find that section right on the FormAssembly website. But that'll take you to our little archive of recent training webinars just like this. And you'll see all kinds of stuff in there. We've done, some of the more advanced pre-fill, some of the more advanced Salesforce features, not quite what we were touching on today, but some good, 30-minute to hour-long trainings on that. But yeah, you'll find that topic as well. Take a look at kind of the recent history there. We try to do at least one of these a month. So you shouldn't have to go too far back, but I think you'll see something you like.
Yep. And don't worry, I've added it to the list for the webinar we're about to do anyways. That's just like, if you need something in the meantime.
Yes.
And Joelle, here's the fantastic final question that we have time for from Lauren asking, Now, I know that we showed this a small bit with the active one, but if you could talk for another moment about filtering the values shown in the dynamic pick lists, what kinds of things can be used to filter that?
Oh my goodness. What can't be used? So with the filtering in the dynamic pick list, you can use any of the Salesforce fields. So how it works is when you select the object that you're searching for, the conditions, when you add a condition, you can say, hey, look at this Salesforce field. And then you can set, I want this to not equal this. And you can have that filter based off of that. You can add multiple conditions. There's that and or button after you add that one condition of like, say, hey, I want to have the account name be not blank and the email to have this. Then you can do that, or you can have those two conditions, or be a FormAssembly employee. Things like that. You're really able to have those conditions and build on those conditions to really filter down and narrow down that data that is returned in the Salesforce dynamic pick list as you need to. You can filter it down so if you have like 500 returned values that are generated in the pick list, you can filter it down so it's just like 10 that are returned. You can really customize those conditions to filter as much as you need to, as long as it's a Salesforce field and you can use a text or a formula, you can do that.
And so I see a little add-on to the question from Lauren here about filtering by record type. So I'm going to add in that what Joelle said does apply to this. You could do it like in the dynamic pick list by doing like filter by record type and then put the ID in there. But I will just note as well, there's a really, really fun way to do it also. And the really fun way to do it is you can actually use like multiple choice fields in your form. You could have it be where like if they select that they are a business partner versus like a nonprofit, there's ways that you can actually get that to filter the dynamic pick list differently each way. We do not have time for that right now, obviously, but our support team will be able to help explain that to you. And or I'll write that down for the next webinar too, just for fun.
Yes. Yeah, lots of different ways you can use those conditions and so many cool ways that sadly don't have time to get into today. But I think that's kind of all that we've got time to answer today. If you guys have any other questions, please reach out to our support team. They're really amazing. They can help answer any questions. If you have any specific, like, hey, I want to know how to do this for my use case, and I'm not sure how to, they can help you out. But as always, thank you guys for coming.
Yeah, that said, I mean, we could easily do a week-long conference on, ways we've used FormAssembly in the past and are using it today. This is just, just a taste. Hopefully it was a little bit inspirational. One more shout out to that resources section that you see kind of in the corner of your screen here on the On24 setup. Some of the stuff you saw today on screen, those quizzes where it was kind of grading the results as people went on, or that introduction to dynamic pick lists at the form level, Salesforce connector. We've got some links to jump into some of that functionality. So if you want to take a look at that directly, that's a great starting point. While you're there, you'll be in the help section. Search for any of these kinds of use cases or feature names, and you'll find something useful there as well. But it's easy to talk about real simple use cases, but all of this is built from our customers and ourselves, kind of using it and having to deal with these real world use cases, right, that need real results, right? So with that, I kind of tied it back to the subtitle at the beginning. That's a good place to leave it. So thank you all for attending this one, providing us some additional ideas for future trainings. Really hope we'll see you at another one. Thanks so much, Knowledge team.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming.
Bye everyone.
All right, see you next time.